so glad that you were able to join us today for this special webinar on the J-1 Physician Waiver process and experience. My name is Dejana Farrar, and I'm a member of the marketing team at Right Constable and Scheme. Before we get things rolling, just some friendly Zoom reminders so that I'm sure you're all familiar with. First, please remain muted during the presentation so that we can avoid any unwanted background noise. Jan has also asked if you're willing to please be on video so that we can see the lovely humans behind the screens. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on YouTube and podcast streaming services next week, in addition to the Right Constable and Scheme website. You'll all receive an email with those links when they're available. Lastly, if you have a question, type it in the chat box. We'll address as many of these as we can at a Q&A at the end of the session. We will also be asking your opinion, so please raise your mechanical hand so that Jan can see them. In order to raise your mechanical hand, it is located under reactions at the bottom of your screen, whether you're using a laptop, an iPad, or your cell phone. Disclaimer, nothing you hear today is to be constructed as legal advice, and no attorney-client relationship is created by attending this seminar. An expert physician immigration attorney
and I think we have
should be consulted as well.
Thank you.
We hope you will choose Jan and our firm for your immigration needs. If you wish to have a copy of our recently published and updated J-1 Physician Guide, please email us at marketing@wcslaw.com. I present to you, Jan.
Thank you so much, Dejana. I welcome the opportunity and the honor of being with you all here today. I would request that you be present with me by turning on your video so, again, as Dejana said, we can see all of your beautiful faces. So can we have, by a show of hands, how many people are finishing their training in June of 2022? Show of electronic hands here. And how many in June of 2023? Okay. All right. So some of the basics, and then we'll take a deep dive into the wild, wonderful world of J-1 waivers and give you some guidelines on how to streamline your journey to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is first a waiver, an H-1B, and then a green card. So whether you complete your medical training in H-1B, J-1, J-2, or other type of EAD, the end is still the same, the green card. It's just that if you're in H-1B status, you may get there faster than if you have to do the J-1 waiver process. All right, so overview here. What you probably already know is that a J-2 spouse may work with an EAD permit, and those are being done pretty quickly now. Okay. Those are being done pretty quickly now, and even if your spouse doesn't intend to work, please get them a J-2 EAD so that they can be part of our community, get a social security number and things like that. Okay, other point. You all know that you have a 30-day grace period at the end of your training, unless you're terminated, and then you don't have a 30-day grace period, like if you're fired from your program. All right, so what can you do during that 30-day period? First of all, you cannot work, but you can file for a change of status from J-1 to H-1 during the grace period. You have a 7-year maximum you can be in J-1 status. And if you get an interested government agency waiver, you are always exempt from the H-1B cap. All right, so that's a good thing to remember about that. Okay, in the waiver world, you generally have to work full-time for 3 years in a medically underserved area, or what we will come to tell you is a Flex 10 area for the 3 years full-time. A question we get all the time is, can you transfer during your 3-year waiver commitment if you have one? The answer is with difficulty. So we're going to talk later about how you should choose your dream waiver job very carefully, because it's anxiety provoking and expensive to transfer during your 3-year waiver commitment. So we call this home residence requirement. Is we designed this a long time ago in the late 80s, a 2 for 3 rule. That means if you work for and agree to work in a medically underserved area for 3 years, we will forgive the requirement that you go home for 2. An interesting little piece of history: there was a congressman who still is there who thought we should have a 2 for 11 years working in a medically underserved area, but we were successful in getting it down to 3. Okay, it's all looks gloomy. You may decide to go home for 2 years. Apparently, most people don't. I think the percentage of people getting waivers is extremely high. However, if you don't get your waiver this year, there are other possibilities. What you can't do is change your status to any status in the United States without a waiver, except for A and G, and those are diplomatic visas. Don't think you're terribly interested in that. I think we've had about 2 over the last 35 years, and they worked as a physician in their home country embassy, and that counted as doing 2 years in their home country. However, you may depart the United States and get a J-2 visa, so you can flip at least once, an O-1 visa, alien of extraordinary ability, or a student visa. So the no-nos are HL or green card without completing your whatever requirement you have that goes with your waiver. Okay, so if you decide to go for 2 years, where are you going? Do not go to the wrong country. It's very disappointing. People have done that. What you need to know is if you're from a Schengen country, you have to go to your home country. You can't go spend your 2 years in Germany when your home country is Spain, for example. So you want to, if you have any questions, look at your certificate of need and your DS 2019, and it's your country of citizenship or last permanent residence, whichever comes later. So we have a number of different kinds of waivers we're going to cover quickly today. Excuse me, I almost lost my voice yesterday. So I've got it back here, so I will ask you to ask a lot of questions in the chat box to save my voice here. So our options are interested government agencies. We refer to that in the shorthand as IGA. Those come in 2 flavors. State 30 waivers, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and federal waivers, the federal agencies currently granting waivers are the HHS, huge volume, Appalachian Regional Commission, and the Delta Regional Authority. Veterans Administration, a few here and there, but because of their processing time internally at the VA, they become very unattractive. So just a minute about the pathway of your waiver. You start with if it's a interested government agency waiver, you start with the government agency. You must have an employer, and you submit an application to the interested government agency, rather your employer does on your behalf. The interested government agency processes the waiver and then forwards it to the Department of State, who then forwards their favorable recommendation to the USCIS, who grants your waiver ultimately. But once you get through the state, you can be fairly certain you're going to get the waiver. Processing times at the State Department have increased exponentially, actually, in the last 2 years, and it's extremely difficult to get an expedite, not impossible, but extremely difficult. So with that said, we're going to talk about which flavor of waiver is right for you. Okay, first we have that you all know and love, the Conrad State 30 programs. They have been around since 1994. Under the Conrad program, each state and territory and possession of the United States gets to issue 30 waivers per year. And they don't get to share their waivers, so it's per state. So a tiny state like Rhode Island will get the same number as Texas. We floated the idea, it hasn't got there yet, that states that don't use their waivers can share them. So the common requirements, which we get asked a lot, it must be a contract for full-time work for 3 years. Full-time work means at least 40 hours per week, providing direct patient care. Second one, which most people don't worry about, is agree to commence employment within 90 days of getting a waiver. Well, that is pretty impossible in many circumstances. In fact, it contradicts your other timelines because you have to finish your training. And if you get a waiver approved by USCIS in February, 90 days is going to go by before you can start work. Now, this has not historically been a concern unless somebody manages to get a waiver 2 years before they finish their training. I recently, like this week, saw a denial of an H-1B based on the fact that the physician had the USCIS approval of his waiver in February, and he wasn't going to start work until July. I'm sure that it would be straightened out, but just keep that in your mind. It's not really something that you have a ton of control over, because states are opening their waiver program, their state 30 programs earlier and earlier. So you apply earlier and earlier and they finish earlier and earlier. And then somebody at USCIS brings up this 90-day thing. So unless they do, I did see one denied that was approved by USCIS in December to start work July 1, 2022. And that really is having your lawyer have a relationship with the state program and ask them to hold your waiver until later to avoid the danger of this. Okay, where must the job be located? In what we call the HPSA area or an MUA, HPSA or MUA. And how do you know if your job is located there? We're going to give you the chart. You Google, can you put that in the chat box, please? Right. Just Google HPSA find by address. And you put in the address and that will tell you whether it's in the basket of goods called HPSA. They're basically two lists: HPSA, health professional shortage area, or medically underserved area population. There are two, and that is important. Now, the bonus here in some states is that each state has the discretion to grant up to 10 of its 30 waivers to physicians who are not going to be physically working in a medically underserved area, but where the physician will serve patients residing in underserved areas. And the number and amount of percentage of patients varies with the state. And you'll find that the states who will grant flex waivers are the states that usually don't fill up their 30 slots with underserved area waivers. Other things to watch out for are non-compete clauses. What is a non-compete clause? Can we have a show of hands how many people do not know what a non-compete clause is? If you don't know, raise your electronic hand. You got to put their hand again. Okay. Good, so I'll go into that. So that can actually be a deal killer for the employer, not necessarily for you, but a non-compete clause is a clause in an employment contract that says that you will not, that if you cease working for the employer who sponsored your waiver, you will not work in any other area practicing medicine within a certain distance of that employer's offices for a certain number of years. For example, If you have a job in the middle of New York, it would say you can't work between here and Newark for 5 years. Okay. They're occasionally enforced. Most states don't allow them. No federal IGA allows them. Okay, the other thing is liquidated damages clauses. A few states have those. I think Alabama does, perhaps Mississippi. What a liquidated damage clause is a clause that says that if you leave your job before the end of your 3 years, you get to pay your employer $250,000 unless you find a job within the designated area. So for example, Alabama, I believe, has one. It says you must find a job in Alabama to finish out your requirement. So you want to be aware of those. Okay, some states have filing fees. Employers, by the way, generally pay the fees for the waivers and all filing fees, the legal fees, filing fees, and they're required to pay them for the age. Okay, the winner of the year is, slide, is the HHS Quick Waiver if you qualify. They finally stepped up to the plate in the spring of 2020 and said, hey, we're going to expand the types of employers and that we will sponsor waivers for. So they expanded it from a very, very limited number of employers, basically federally qualified community health centers, to any healthcare facility in America which has one of those HPSA scores of 7 or greater. So they will not sponsor, I can't see me, they will not sponsor from your other list, right? They will, the MUA list, they will sponsor from the HPSA list. However, the thing that they still haven't gotten it right on, the religion on, and it's not for lack of asking, is we have, they will only sponsor primary care. So primary care, in case anybody forgot, is family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, OBGYN, and psychiatry. 5 things. So they will sponsor you. They're very quick. They're very paperwork light. They're very friendly. They're wonderful. You do have to show recruitment. Just a note about recruitment. Virtually every program requires that the employer show some type of recruitment before the waiver is filed, testing the labor market to see that if there are any U.S. physicians who want your job. So they're great. They get the award of the year. If they would just expand to all specialties, nobody would have any problems. But they're not going to do that anytime soon. All right, the next flavor of waiver. So HHS gets 3 gold stars. ARC, in an expansive mode, actually agreed to sponsor primary care and subspecialists. And remember that all federal waivers are open, programs are open year-round, unlimited in number. Don't forget that, unlimited, open year-round. So you can go find one of these jobs today if you qualify. So the ARC and the DRA, Delta Regional Authority, are both geographic based. The job offer must be within the geographic area of the ARC, and you can find those areas by going to the website there, arc.gov. So all specialties within the geographic area of the ARC. Now our 2 baskets, they will only do 1 basket, the health professional shortage area basket. They require extensive recruitment. Contracts must have a $250,000 penalty clause, which means if the employment relationship terminates, and it doesn't even go into fault, you get to pay the employer $250,000. It's rarely enforced. I think the attorneys collectively know about 4 cases since about 1990. ARC was the first program to be established, waiver program, no non-compete clauses, and they usually come up with extra documentation they require at the last minute. making you think your lawyer doesn't know what they're doing, but they really do come up with new and additional information. It's like your USCIS beloved RFEs, request for evidence. Delta Regional Authority is wonderful. Covers over, again, it's geographic-based waivers, covers over 200 counties in those states listed there. You can go to their website and look at your county. The bottom part of Illinois, a lot of Kentucky, a lot of Louisiana. You've got Tennessee, Memphis is in the area. So they will take any kind of underserved area at HPSA, MUA, MUP. $3,000 application fee with a partial refund if you don't get the waiver. All medical specialties now. Be aware of the recruitment required, very specific, both by ARC and DRA. Make sure your employer has that. The DRA is very specific. They require an ad in a national journal, a regional, and a state journal. Something like JAMA, and it depends on the location for the regional one, and then a local one. So you don't want to come up short on that. Another note for everyone is that this should go for all waivers, but DRA's recently been enforcing it. And that is that you should not sign your contract before your employer has placed the recruitment. The government thinks that's a little disingenuous to sign you up and then place the advertisements trying to find an American. So the contract may have to be written with that in mind, and that as I said, the DRA has recently rejected some cases for that reason. Okay, VA waivers used to be great. They used to do about 250 a year, basically become useless to J-1 physicians because of their own internal VA rules that make the processing times unwelcome for your time frame. They generally can't start recruitment for a July 1st opening until the following December, and then they have all this internal bureaucracy, and you may make it out. So it's very good for Canadian physicians. Okay, subspecialists are heavily recruited at VAs, and maybe that you can get a joint VA and university appointment. Those aren't as common as they used to be. The requirement there is that you work 5/8 of the time at the VA. Okay, so that's for the VA. So we'll go through the pros and cons of the state and federal program. Okay, so the pros and the cons. On the state programs, you may or may not have a non-compete clause. Federal waivers must have them. State programs are not open year-round. Federal programs are. Obviously, the state programs are limited to 30, the federal are not. So the other disadvantages, you can all take a picture of that, or these slides will be up on our website. So the thing that you probably might forget is which ones do HPSA, the HPSA basket, which ones do the MUA. DRA does HPSA and MUA, ARC only HPSA, HHS only HPSAs. All right, so that's that. Now, let's say you've chosen the waiver program. What's next? Well, it used to be the rest was smooth sailing, but with COVID and personnel issues, the State Department has slowed way down. So after you get out of your State 30 program or your federal interested government agency program, they forward your application by paper, not electronically. I have been working on a scan project so that everybody can come to the table and scan these applications. So the first frustration is the agency, let's say HHS, tells you it sent your waiver to the Department of State on March 5th, for example. And you look March 6th, you look March 15th, you look April 1st, and it's not there. And then you panic, say they've lost my waiver. They probably haven't lost it. It goes into an anthrax mailroom. So those of you who have been around long enough to remember anthrax. So it goes through these checks. So it will likely be 4 to 6 weeks before you show up on the State Department website. There is your website to check under item 2. That's where you check your waiver status. And your lawyer will have gotten for you your Department of State case number at the beginning of the process, and that number must appear on everything. So you will check that, and you will be frustrated because it will take maybe 4 to 6 weeks to show up. And the State Department has advised us that to manage our expectations, which none of us really have time to do, that you should expect it will take 4 to 16 weeks at the State Department. And the time may even be longer during the busy season, when you all are supposed to be at work on July 1st. It gets pretty frantic. But don't get too frantic. And then once the State Department makes their recommendation, they send it to USCIS. They actually scan it to USCIS. Maybe we could admit everybody. So they send it to the USCIS by scan to Vermont. Now, your next frustration that you will experience is that your waiver, your interested government agency waiver ends up at the USCIS in Vermont. However, your H-1B petition ends up in California. No brainer, right? They talk to each other. Not exactly. They've been reminded, they have a memo that says, if you don't have your actual waiver approval from USCIS, you may file your H-1B change of status petition with the Department of State recommendation. As we run out of time and get closer to the end of our clients' DS 2019s, we may file with only the State Department recommendation. Or if it gets really late, we may file with less than that. Now, USCIS does have the right to deny a change of status, saying that you didn't have your USCIS approval yet, in which case your head will hurt because you say, what, you're the same agency. So when you have to file without the USCIS approval with just a piece of paper or a screenshot from the State Department, you may well get an RFE asking for the USCIS approval. So USCIS is approximately 4 to 6 weeks. Why don't we take some questions now? Because we're going to be moving on in how to find the job and keep it.
Okay.
No, you see chat?
I just wanted to check and stuff on the screen. Okay.
Great question. If the Conrad 30 isn't approved, can you go back to it? Doesn't get approved, may we apply for ARC waiver for the same job? Yes, and absolutely. As long as you qualify for the HHS ARC waiver job, yes. Next question. How problematic is it to extend J-1 for board beyond 7 years? For example, after doing 3 years, after doing 7 years. I don't think it's a problem, but call ECFMG. They have changed a lot of their rules and tightened up a lot of rules. So always check with them and get it in an email. Okay, put your questions in there. This is your chance. All right, the next topic. So this is what you do after you find your job.
Okay, you want to go back to the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay.
This is how to find and keep your waiver job. Well, a lot of you know better than I do how to find a job through friends, relatives, and colleagues who have done a waiver in a particular place, or they know where waiver jobs are. There's a lot of sharing. You all are really great about helping out each other. You may also use a recruiter. I'm sure all of your mailboxes are full of emails from recruiters. Now, what you want to be aware of with recruiters is you should never, as the physician, pay a recruiter. That is a huge red flag. If 3, 4, or 5 of them. And beware of recruiters that you pay, they want you to pay and promise job placement. It's hard to make that promise. Now you will find that many recruiters will just send out a bazillion we used to call them cold calling when it was by phone, emails saying we've got this job, this place. And you probably, at the end of this webinar, will know more about where you can work and what works than the recruiter will. We do hold webinars for recruiters. We're going to be holding one in June for recruiters and employers. So you'll need to educate them, put them in touch with your physician immigration attorney. We would be happy to explain to them why a particular job qualifies, because we went through the broad outlines, but there are a lot of other nuances that you want to be aware of. Other sources in the middle there is 3rnet.org. The arrow is on it in the middle of the slide. What's great about 3rnet.org is it is used by employers who know they have J-1 eligible positions for you. So that's a good place to start. Another place I've heard from employers is Doc Cafe. And they're very robust and they tend to be educated about the nuances of the J-1 life. All right, for those of you starting out, or maybe your dream job didn't work out, the waiver situation, or right now you're looking for a job. Okay, so landing your dream waiver job. Your dream job is what you make it. You say, this is going to be my dream job. All right, some tips here. Keep your CV to 1 page for non-academic jobs. Of course, the academic jobs, you want to stack the papers up. We have discussions. I talk to employers all the time, as well as physicians. There's a difference of opinion, but generally everyone agrees that it's better to put your photo on your resume. That will help them remember you. I don't see that very often on resumes. I suggest it might be a good idea. Make it a nice photo. I wouldn't have it, on the beach surfing or something like that. Okay, and before you go to your job interview, educate yourself about the medical and civic community before your visit. That is very important, particularly in rural areas. A lot of these rules are more applicable to rural areas than urban areas. So find out, why is London, Kentucky named London, Kentucky? I don't even know that, but find out why London, find out the history of the community, what's important, and what matters to them, because you're going to be living with them for several years in the community. Always take your spouse with you to the interview. You always, as you know, have to keep your spouse happy. The employer doesn't want an unhappy spouse either, because if the spouse is unhappy, they will make you unhappy and then you'll end up leaving the community. So nobody wins there. Before your visit, ask to meet a real estate agent, physicians, and others in the medical community, civic leaders. Tour, if you have children, ask for a tour of the schools your children will be attending. That will make you stand out. What you don't do is fly in. We call it a fly in. The employer says, well, get here, or you say, well, I have the weekend off, and we know, all of you are very busy, working only 80 hours a week, and your schedules are tight. You've got a lot to do. Do not fly in under the cover of darkness and fly out the next morning. That is a super huge red flag, because probably nobody's there and nothing's open, particularly if it's a clinic job. So we did actually have had some people who flew in on Friday night and left on Saturday afternoon. They didn't get to see anything or meet anybody. They saw an empty clinic, and you can imagine how that job turned out. So you want to look that it looks like somewhere you and your family would love to live for several years. Your commitment is for 3, but it ends up, if they sponsor you for a green card, usually being more. So your experience is really what you make of it. You know, I hear often, you know, doing my 3-year waiver job is like a prison sentence. Okay, who decided it was a prison sentence? You decided it was a prison sentence, but you can have a great life everywhere. Remember, in small communities, you will be greatly, greatly respected just for being a doctor. They still respect doctors, particularly in rural areas. And they will invite you over to their house for dinner. You want to integrate into the community. That will make your job worthwhile and maybe stay. Now, one thing that people are shy about bringing up at the interview is a job for your spouse. If you need a job for your spouse, say so. In a small community, they are hiring both of you. So they want your spouse to be happy. Don't be shy about it. If they really want you in the community, they will go way out of their way to find a job for you. The next one I love, never have your spouse. That would be all caps, boldface, never have your spouse follow up on your job application. That job application will go in the wastebasket, in the trash. They think it's very weird. It just will. Obviously, in many cases, you know, the spouse may not be working and have the time to do it, but I'm sorry, just don't do it. I hear that from employers pretty much universally. Another thing you should do is send a handwritten thank you note to all who interviewed you, as well as the person who coordinated the trip. Okay, up in the corner there, you will see, can you move the screen up? Thank you. Move ours over. Okay, up in the right-hand corner, you see this piece of paper that says thank you on it, and there's an envelope there. And you might even be efficient and on the plane to your job interview, write a thank you note. Put it in the envelope, put a US postage stamp on and mail it. That will help keep your job, your resume on top, because virtually no one else does it anymore. They send a quick email. Next thing, don't rush to sign a contract without doing due diligence on the job and on the community. Okay, you all, you know, it's understandable people are anxious to get their future tied down, their waiver tied down, but don't rush. You know, don't leave common sense at the door. If there are warning signs, heed them. Ask around. If you spend a weekend there, you'll find out a lot. Or weekday is better, ask to see the hospital, meet everybody. And you will know how good the job in the community will be by how you're treated during the interview. I would say it's probably virtually never a good idea to rush to sign a contract on the day of the interview. We've had people do that to their pretty much everlasting regret, because why are they rushing you? A day or two, you may want to have an attorney look at it. So those are some of the tips. I would welcome more. Now we'll go on to the last 2 types of waivers and then take all your questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the question box. So the other flavor of waivers, so you've got your federal and your state interested government agency waivers. Those require 3 years, 3 years, 3 years, no exceptions. Okay, now, we have another kind of waiver that has 2 other kinds of waivers that have no service commitment. Hardship and persecution waivers. Okay, a hardship waiver and a persecution waiver are a lot alike. They're processed the same. The initial hardship or persecution waiver application is filed on the same form, an I-612, with USCIS first. So your IGA waivers go to the USCIS last. Hardship and persecution waivers go to the USCIS first. So stop 1 is the USCIS. They're taking probably 6 to 8 months now. and then they send the favorable recommendation to the Department of State, and then the Department of State makes their recommendation. So it's really one person who's been at the waiver review division of the Department of State who decides your fate. Now, there are instances where USCIS can issue a request for evidence. I hope all of you are familiar with that term or will be. RFE, asking for more evidence of hardship. In the case of hardship, more evidence of persecution. There are a lot of good things about it, so you've got to plan early for a hardship or persecution waiver. We have some optimism that they're going to speed up, but you may just be dreaming. Okay, hardship waivers. Number one, not everybody's eligible. Only if you have a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, green card, spouse or minor child. Spouse or minor child. You have to have an anchor relative for hardship, not for persecution. For hardship, you should look at exceptional, unusual, cruel, all of those superlatives, hardships. You have to have a two-pronged analysis for a hardship waiver. Extreme hardship to your qualifying relatives if they go back home with you, spouse and or child, and extreme hardship if they stay here without you. So the processing time is long. Of course, both hardship and persecution are unlimited in number and always available. So your sponsorship under ECFMG will continue until your hardship or persecution waiver is approved. And then you can work for the rest of the current program listed on your DS 2019, plus the board exam, but you cannot get an extension for a training program or at another level, such as a fellowship. So I know timing is brutally hard to imagine. Everything is too long. But on the other hand, you may be punished if you do it too early in your programs. You won't get any more J's to say finish a fellowship. And then you say, what do I do? They tell you we don't do you're eligible, of course, for an H1. They said we don't do H1s, and this happens a lot, and therefore you need a workaround. So the other great thing about hardship and persecution is that you can file at any time during your training. So that is the good thing about that. Again, on the other end, getting the waiver too early. I know it was seldom heard that somebody got something too early. A couple of years ago, a lot of Syrian doctors got their waivers too early, hardship waivers, and they said, sorry, you can't have an extension. So we had to scramble and find workarounds. So the other thing to note about persecution waivers is that you do not need any anchor relative. It's similar to political asylum, but it is not. So if you qualify for a persecution waiver, you may qualify for political asylum, which would be certainly perhaps preferable, depending on the country, because if you get political asylum, a waiver is part of the asylum grant, and you get a green card. You get to apply for a green card a year later. So a lot of times we use the persecution waiver when a person is a citizen of one country, but got their certificate of need from another country. Let's say an Iranian who's a citizen of Germany, but got their certificate of need from Iran, and have a fear of persecution in returning to Iran, or have a US citizen spouse or child. All right, those are great. Just note the processing times. Do we think they're going to get better? Yes, we do, but it takes a lot of timing. So we've already gone over the pros and cons. Very high approval rate. No, very high approval rate. No employment service obligation, can work anywhere in theory, can go straight to a green card if you're eligible. Okay, disadvantages, of course, we said the lengthy processing times. You cannot change status in the US from J1 to H1B, you must depart. And under the hardship and persecution waivers, your employer must be cap exempt. So remember, you get the cap exempt HAP yourself, which is good for your whole life if you get a federal or state interested government agency waiver. Not so with hardship and persecution. You have to have a cap exempt employer until if you are very lucky, you may find an employer who really needs you, loves you, you get a hardship waiver, and they will start your green card substantially in advance of when you finish your training and start work. So I welcome any questions on that. I'll just go ahead and finish up here and then take questions. Look like we have about 15 of them. Okay, options. You want your dream job. You want a waiver for your dream job. You didn't get it because the program filled up or the timing just didn't work for you. Admit, just didn't work for you. Okay, so but you don't want to go home. You want to consider your career. So one option is an O1 visa. O1 visas are non-immigrant visas that are available to people of extraordinary ability and have other people who say they're real extraordinary and some publications and so forth. Some employers think, as particularly a university, oh, just go get an O1. An O1 takes a lot of, preparation and work. It's a mini application for a green card. So that could work. Again, you have to leave and get the O1 if you don't have a waiver. The second example I'll just mention so you have it on your radar screen is what we call a PNIW. It's a Physician National Interest Waiver. And the great thing about that is unless you were born in India or China, you can file that self-petition prior to completing your 3-year waiver commitment and prior to getting the waiver as well. So that requires a 5-year commitment and contracts proving such to work in medically underserved areas. It's a pathway to a green card. And obviously you'll get a work permit and be able to get to work and for your employer without a waiver. You got to eventually get one to get the green card. So you didn't get one this year, your employer will try next year and so forth. Caveat on that is you're working in any status other than H-1B and you eventually get a state 30 or federal waiver, interested government agency waiver. None of the time before counts. In the opinion of USCIS, I kind of disagree, but the regs right now say you have to do your 3 years only in H-1B status. Okay, another option is to extend your status for fellowship, extend it for boards, and keep looking for jobs. Then we just discussed political asylum or temporary protected status. And then of course the big bonus here is Canadian citizens can begin work on an H or any other visa without a waiver. So Canadian citizens have a great advantage in the job market because they can be available if you're in a state that uses all its waivers. Well, then you as a Canadian are available now and can try for the waiver next year. So I want to get through this. The H-1B physicians I'm going to run through quickly. I don't know if we have any people who who did their training on H and therefore are not interested in the waiver. You might want to give us a call if you have any more questions. But just some points for all both H's and J's is for the J's, you know that you can file the H-1B petition as soon as the Department of State recommends approval. Next thing that we always have a problem with, for those of you who haven't signed your contracts yet, this seems to go back and forth and get back and forth and cause everybody a lot of angst and the attorney a lot of work in changing the paperwork many times. The start date cannot be more than 30 days after the expiration of J-1 status, period, the end. If you do another date after that, it gets denied. The change of status gets denied, the H petition is approved, then you have to leave the country and get a visa. In addition, your H-1 petition, the last date it can be filed if you're a J is within 30 days of the expiration of your most recent DS 2019. And if you have an extension to take the boards, always get that extension. You never know when there's going to be a glitch along the way. The extension to take the boards if available. H-1Bs are approved up to 3 years, can be approved for a total of 6. The 6-year limit can be waived forever if you're able to get the approval of an I-140 employment petition. Okay, an important thing to know for you job seekers is that only the employer can pay the legal fees and the USCIS filing fees for the H-1B petition. There is an additional fee, which I'm sure you've all heard of, the premium processing fee. It's currently $2,500. Went up from $1,225 a couple of years ago. What they agree to do within 15 days is make an adjudication. That's 15 business days, not calendar days. So if you can avoid paying it, do avoid paying it, your employer will be happy. Now, either the employer or the employee can pay the premium processing fee if payment of the fee is solely for the benefit of the H-1B foreign national. Okay, I'll just skip through this quickly. You have to commence employment within 60 days of approval. Now, you're all looking around for cap-exempt employers if you did your training on H or get a hardship or persecution waiver. This is a quick overview. I want to get to your questions. Public or nonprofit institutions of higher ed, that means colleges or universities, are exempt. Nonprofit organizations such as hospitals, community health organizations with affiliation agreements with an institution of higher ed is eligible, or the employer is a for-profit or not-for-profit entity. So this applies to hospitalists. This applies to anybody who any physician who spends a lot of time in the hospital. If you spend more than 51% of your time in the hospital, even if you're employed by a private for-profit group, you can still be cap exempt. Okay, as a present to you all, the last page has a flow chart so you can understand all this. I know we threw a lot of things at you. Let's take the first question in the chat room. Okay, go ahead. No, that's the last one. Go to number 1. At the top. Sorry, we're having technical problems here. All the way.
Some of these I think they've done
Okay.
before.
Go ahead. Somebody asked, can we get the presentation completely full screen? Oh, sorry. If you sign a contract with a J-1 sponsor and you get a hardship waiver, can you leave the job? Are you committed to complete the 3 years? That question is interesting. Basically, if you don't have the J-1 waiver through the contract you signed, then you can rely on your hardship waiver. And then you're talking about whether there's any liability under contract law, not immigration law. Next. Maybe. Yeah, go ahead. Can J-1 be changed to F-1 visa rather than obtaining a new visa stamp at a consular post if unable to secure a waiver in time? Nope, you have to leave to get the F-1 stamp. Next question, is it acceptable to reap a stipend and or sign-on bonus from a future employer while still in J-1 status? It is possible, and you want to seek legal advice for the parameters of the bonus and the stipend. It depends upon how the employer treats it. There's a lot of tax questions there. Do DRA, excellent question. Do DRA and ARC sponsor flex slots? Absolutely not. Next question. We just answered that one.
Yeah, we did.
Can I travel when my residency fellowship ends and while my H-1B application is pending? It depends on what country you would come. I mean, you would come back on a J, or you would get a visa at your home country consular post. it's probably a good idea to wait till the H-1B is approved. If you change a J-1 to F-1, are you able to get a green card without doing a waiver? Excellent question. Absolutely not. We're talking physician waivers here, right? Next question. Is it possible for a J-2 dependent with an EAD to continue working without interruption whilst the J is transitioning to an H-1B with a waiver? No, it is not. Most academic programs are hesitant to hire a physician needing a J-1 waiver. Is there data showing retention rates at USCIS or the State Department of Health? No, there is not, but the Library of Congress is in the process. The Congressional Research Service is putting together a study on that. The last one done was 1995, and they showed that there's an overwhelmingly high retention rate of J-1 physicians in their waiver job as opposed to Americans. Next question, can you tell us about the DS-3035? Once it generates a case number, can anything go back and be changed? Yes, with some difficulty. It's a little hard for me to explain. Yes, it is. Our paralegals know how to do that. Is there an advantage if my spouse already has a J-1 waiver and I apply for a waiver the following year? Depends. Some states will give preference in the waiver selection to people who already have a spouse working under a state 30 or federal waiver in their state. No other real particular advantage. Is there a way a dependent spouse can work when we are doing the waiver? Yes, they get a H4. First of all, you get an I-140 approved either through a PNIW or EB1, EB2, some employment-based petition approved, and then your spouse can get an H4 EAD, which they are not currently allowing premium processing on, but that is coming. Excellent. Is it acceptable that my spouse call on my, have to follow up on my application with the attorney? Sure, why not? As long as it's clear that the spouse authorized the spouse to talk to us, no problem. Any experience with Tennessee on only allowing the placement of one specialist per hospital? Tennessee is a great state to do a waiver. However, we learned yesterday that they have used all 30 waivers this year. You still may be able to get a DRA waiver in Tennessee. And let's see, I'm not sure if the ARC goes to Tennessee or not. I think so. Anyway, ARC definitely, they will make exceptions of one specialist physician per hospital. It's a great program in Tennessee and they are reasonable. So for example, if there was a direct hospital hire of a doctor and they needed, and you were with a private practice or a hospitalist staffing company or whatever, it could be possible. It's negotiable, let's put it that way, depending on their demand. But this year they're out of waivers, so you have to look to HHS if you're primary care. And very importantly, primary care includes hospitalists with respect to HHS waivers. So they've done several hundred waivers this year, for most of them for hospitalists. So you want to go through HHS if you can. Next question, is it possible to file for 2 states? You may only have one IGA waiver pending at a time. That means either the state 30 or the federal waiver programs, ARC, DRA, VA, or there's a big penalty for that. If you're denied a waiver, get evidence that you were denied. And of course you can submit in another state. Yes, the employer, next question, the employer should put in the contract that they will help with the green card. Okay, one more question. Can I apply for a hardship persecution waiver if you have an O visa? If you previously had a J-1, so the waivers waive the J-1 home residence requirement, right? Next line question, final question, and then DJ will announce the next webinar dates for you. Does my employer have to adhere to posting sliding fee notice in order to be eligible for an HHS waiver? Absolutely. All right, that concludes the questions. If we didn't get to any, we'll just email them to us and we'll answer them. And thank you all for attending. And Dijon, please give the dates of our next webinars.
Yes, of course. Thank you all for attending again. The next webinar.
Thank you all. Most of you aren't showing up.
The next webinar will be held on June 9th at 1 p.m. And then the one following that will be on July 14th at 1 p.m.
All Eastern time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So stay tuned and we look forward to helping you with any of your immigration needs. Bye and have a great day. Thank you for attending.